Fire tore through the sky, and Ethan Cole dropped flat into the mud as a burning piece of metal screamed over his head and slammed into the ridge behind him. The ground shook so hard his teeth rattled. For a moment, he thought the outpost itself was under attack, but then he saw it clearly through the smoke. A ship, not one of theirs, spinning wildly as it fell toward the valley below. He was alone on patrol, 3 miles from the nearest checkpoint, and every instinct told him to call it in and wait for backup. But the ship was still falling, and it was going to hit the old mining road, where a supply convoy was due to pass within the hour. If it exploded there, the blast would take out anyone nearby. He didn't have time to wait for orders. Ethan ran. The forest around Outpost Varan was thick with old pine trees, and branches whipped across his face as he pushed through them, boots sinking into wet ground. The roar of the falling ship grew louder, a deep groaning sound like metal being torn apart from the inside. He reached the ridge just as it disappeared behind the tree line, and a moment later the whole valley lit up orange. The impact threw him backward off his feet. Heat rolled over him in a wave, and dirt and small stones rained down from the sky. He lay there for a second, ears ringing, staring up at drifting smoke, and then he forced himself up and kept moving toward the crash site. What he found when he broke through the last line of trees stopped him cold. The ship was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was long and curved, made of a pale silver metal that seemed to shimmer even through the smoke, and it had cracked open along one side like an egg. Steam hissed from broken vents. Strange symbols, glowing faintly blue, ran along what was left of the hull. This was not a human aircraft. It was not anything from any nation on Earth. Ethan's hand went to the rifle slung across his back, but he didn't raise it yet. Protocol said he should retreat immediately and report an unknown craft. Protocol said a lot of things. But he could hear something moving inside the wreckage, a faint, pained sound, almost like breathing, and he found himself walking closer instead of walking away. He climbed over a twisted piece of the hull and looked into the broken opening. Inside, half buried under fallen debris, was a figure. At first, in the dim light, he thought it might be a person, one of the ship's crew, human in shape at least. 2 arms, 2 legs, a face turned toward him. But as his eyes adjusted, he saw the details that told him otherwise. Her skin held a faint silver sheen beneath the dirt and blood. Her eyes, when they opened and found his, were a deep violet color, with no white at all, only that rich color and a black center. Her hair was pale, almost colorless, spread out around her like spilled water. She was alive, and she was afraid. Ethan raised both hands slowly, showing her his palms, the universal sign that he meant no harm, though he had no idea if it meant anything to her at all. She tried to move, and gasped in pain, one arm clearly injured, pinned beneath a piece of the wrecked ceiling. He should have stepped back right then. He should have called for extraction, and let trained specialists handle whatever this was. Instead, he found himself climbing further into the wreckage, testing the ground beneath his boots before each step, moving toward her the way he might approach a wounded animal, careful not to startle it. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly, knowing she likely couldn't understand him, but hoping his tone would carry the meaning, even if the words did not. "Let me help you." She watched him with those wide violet eyes, tense and ready to react, but she did not fight him when he began working to free her arm. The metal beam pinning her was heavy, and it took him several long minutes to shift it enough, bracing his boots against the buckled floor and pushing with everything he had. When it finally gave way, she let out a sharp breath and pulled her arm free, cradling it against her chest. Up close, Ethan could see how badly hurt she was. A gash along her side had bled through what remained of her clothing, some kind of woven fabric unlike anything he recognized, dyed deep blue and threaded with fine silver patterns. Whatever her ship had been, it had not been a simple scout craft. Everything about her, from the fine stitching of her clothes to the elegant curve of the wreckage around them, suggested she was someone important. In the distance, he heard the low thrum of engines, human engines. His own people, likely already scrambling toward the crash site after seeing the fire from the outpost. He had only minutes to decide. If he called this in, if he simply stepped back and let Frontier Command find her here, she would be taken into custody immediately. Best case, she would spend years being studied, questioned, treated as a specimen rather than a person. Worst case, someone in a position of power would decide she was a threat that needed to be eliminated before she could tell anyone what she knew. Ethan had seen enough of how his own chain of command handled the unknown to know that mercy was never guaranteed. He looked at her again. She was still watching him, breathing hard, one hand pressed to the wound at her side. But there was something in her expression that had shifted since he first found her. Less fear, more calculation. She was afraid, yes, but she was also studying him, trying to understand what kind of creature had climbed into a broken ship to help her instead of harming her. "Come on," Ethan said, and this time he reached out and gently took her uninjured arm, guiding her to her feet. She swayed, unsteady, and leaned into him without seeming to fully decide to do it, as though her body trusted him, even while her mind was still deciding whether it should. Getting her out of the wreckage was slow work. Every movement seemed to cause her pain, though she made almost no sound, biting back whatever cries wanted to escape. Ethan half-carried her over the broken hull, down into the mud, and into the tree line just as he heard voices approaching from the direction of the outpost. He had no plan beyond the next few seconds. There was an old maintenance shelter half a mile deeper into the forest, a concrete bunker left over from when the outpost had been built, rarely used and mostly forgotten. It was the only place he could think of to hide her. "Stay quiet," he whispered, though he doubted she understood the words. He held a finger to his lips instead, hoping the gesture would translate. She looked at his finger, then at his lips, then nodded once, slow and deliberate, as if filing the gesture away to remember later. They moved through the trees together, her weight leaning heavily against him, her breathing shallow but steady. Behind them, he heard the search party reach the crash site, heard shouted orders and the crackle of radios. He kept moving, staying low, cutting through the thickest part of the forest where the undergrowth would hide their tracks. By the time they reached the old bunker, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in deep orange that reminded him uncomfortably of the fire from the crash. He pushed open the rusted door and helped her inside, lowering her carefully onto an old cot that had been left there years ago. In the dim light filtering through a cracked window, he finally had a moment to really look at her. Up close, without the panic of the crash and the chase, she was strikingly beautiful in a way that felt both familiar and completely foreign. Her features were fine and sharp, her silver-touched skin smooth despite the dirt and blood. Around her neck, half hidden by torn fabric, he noticed a thin circlet made of the same pale metal as her ship, inlaid with small dark stones that seemed to catch what little light there was. It looked like a crown. Ethan knelt beside the cot and began cleaning the wound at her side, using the small medical kit from his pack. The same kit every soldier carried for emergencies. She watched his hands the entire time, tense at first, then slowly relaxing as she realized he was being careful, that he knew what he was doing. "You're safe here," he said softly, more to fill the silence than anything else. "For now, at least." She said something back, her voice low and musical, the words utterly unlike any language he had ever heard. It wasn't harsh or alien in the way he might have expected. It sounded almost like song, rising and falling in a rhythm that felt intentional, structured, like a real language rather than random sound. He shook his head slowly. "I don't understand you, but I'm listening." Something in her expression shifted again at that. A flicker of surprise, maybe even the beginning of trust. She reached up with her uninjured hand and touched 2 fingers to her own chest, then extended them toward him, palm up, as if offering something. Ethan didn't know what the gesture meant, but he understood it as some kind of offering, some kind of acknowledgement. He mirrored the movement instinctively, touching his own chest and extending his hand toward her the same way. Her lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, quickly hidden by a wince of pain as she shifted on the cot. Outside, the search continued. He could hear distant shouts, the whir of a drone passing overhead, engines rumbling along the forest roads. Sooner or later, they would expand the search radius. Sooner or later, someone would think to check the old bunker. He needed a plan, and he needed one fast. But looking at her, at the way she watched him with careful, intelligent eyes despite her pain and her fear, Ethan realized something had already changed. Whatever happened next, Whatever came from this moment in the wreckage and the long walk through the trees, he was not going to hand her over. Not to Frontier Command, not to anyone. He didn't yet know her name. He didn't know where she came from, what she meant to her people, or why her ship had been falling from the sky in the first place. All he knew was that something about her felt important, more important than the report he was supposed to file, more important than the rules he had spent his whole career following without question. Outside, the sky darkened fully, stars beginning to emerge above the smoke still drifting from the crash site. Ethan sat beside the cot, listening to the sound of searchers moving through the forest, and made a decision that would end up changing everything he thought he knew about his place in the universe. He was going to protect her, whatever it cost him. The night stretched on, tense and quiet, broken only by distant voices and the occasional beam of a searchlight sweeping past the bunker's cracked window. Ethan kept watch by the door, rifle across his knees, while behind him, the wounded stranger drifted in and out of an uneasy sleep. Every so often her breathing would catch, and he would glance back to check on her, unsure if she was in pain or simply dreaming in a language he could never hope to understand. Somewhere out there, his commanding officers were organizing a full search of the area, certain that whatever had crashed in the valley carried answers, or threats, or both. Ethan understood he was now standing directly between his own people and the truth. He understood, too, that once this choice was made, there would be no simple way to take it back. But when he looked again at the woman resting on the cot, at the crown hidden beneath torn fabric, and the quiet strength in her face, even in sleep, he felt certain of one thing. Whoever she was, she deserved a chance to explain herself before anyone decided what to do with her. And he intended to make sure she got that chance, no matter what it cost him. The forest outside grew quiet as the search moved further away, voices fading into the distance, and for the first time since the crash, Ethan allowed himself to breathe. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new decisions, and a truth far larger than he could yet imagine. But for tonight, in the fragile safety of an old forgotten bunker, the soldier and the stranger from the stars were, for the moment, safe. 3 days later, Ethan crouched inside the bunker with a stolen data pad balanced on his knee, watching lines of foreign symbols scroll across the screen as he tried, for the 10th time, to get the translation program to work. The device had come from the wreckage, small and undamaged despite the crash, and he had risked a second trip back to the crash site under cover of darkness to retrieve it. If anyone at the outpost noticed the missing hours from his patrol log, he had not heard about it yet. That silence worried him more than any accusation would have. The woman, still nameless to him, sat across the small room, her injured side wrapped in clean bandages, her posture straighter now than it had been the night of the crash. She watched him work with sharp, patient attention, occasionally reaching out to adjust something on the datapad herself, her fingers moving with the ease of someone who understood the technology far better than he did. "There," she said suddenly, and Ethan nearly dropped the pad in surprise. Her voice, when it spoke his language, still carried the musical rhythm of her own tongue, but the words themselves were clear. "You can talk," he said, staring at her. "I have been able to understand fragments since yesterday," she admitted, tilting her head slightly. "Your language is not so different from several others I know. The device only needed calibration to complete the pattern." Ethan set the pad down, a strange mixture of relief and unease settling over him. Relief, because finally they could speak to each other directly. Unease, because he suddenly realized how much she must have understood already, how much she had been listening to and observing while he thought she couldn't follow a word. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" "I needed to be certain," she said simply. "Of you. Of what kind of creature would risk so much to hide an enemy inside his own camp? You're not my enemy. Your people would disagree," she said, and there was no accusation in her tone, only a plain statement of fact. "I have seen how your kind speaks of the unknown. Fear first. Questions later, if at all." Ethan couldn't argue with that. He had grown up on stories of first contact scenarios drilled into every recruit, all of them ending the same way. Overwhelming force, containment, control. Nothing in his training had ever suggested cooperation as the first response. "What's your name?" he asked instead, deciding the conversation needed somewhere gentler to go. She studied him for a long moment before answering, as though weighing how much to reveal. Valeth. Valeth, he repeated carefully, testing the shape of it. I'm Ethan. Ethan, she said back, and something about hearing his name in her voice, wrapped in that strange melodic accent, made him feel oddly exposed, as though she had learned something important about him simply by saying it aloud. Your ship, he said, steering the conversation toward the questions that had been eating at him since the crash. It wasn't a simple scout vessel. Even in pieces, I could tell that much. What was it doing out here, this far from any charted system? Valeth's expression grew guarded, the openness from a moment ago retreating behind something more careful. It is complicated. I've got time, Ethan said. And you don't have anywhere else to go right now. She was quiet for a while, staring at the cracked window where thin morning light was beginning to filter through. When she finally spoke again, her voice had lost some of its earlier caution, replaced by something heavier, more tired. My ship was attacked, she said. Not by your people, by my own. Ethan frowned. Your own people attacked you. A faction within my court, she said. Those who believe the old ways of my people should never change, no matter the cost. They do not agree with the direction I have tried to lead us, and they used my journey through this sector as an opportunity to remove me quietly, far from home, where the blame could be placed on unknown enemies or simple misfortune. That's why you were afraid when I found you, Ethan realized slowly. You didn't know if I was one of them. I did not know what you were at all, Valeth admitted. Only that you were not Skarnari, and that gave me a strange kind of hope, even as it frightened me. Skarnari, Ethan repeated. That's your people. Yes, and you're important to them. The crown, the ship, the way you speak. You're not just a passenger who happened to be aboard. Valeth met his eyes directly, and for the first time since the crash, he saw something like resolve settle over her features, replacing the caution that had defined her since they met. I am their queen. The words landed heavier than Ethan expected, even though some part of him had already guessed as much, from the moment he first saw the crown hidden beneath her torn clothing. Still, hearing it stated plainly, changed something in the room, some balance between them, shifting in a way he couldn't quite name. A queen, he said slowly, of an empire I've never even heard of, hiding in a bunker on a backwater world, patched up with human bandages. It is not how I imagined my journey ending. No, Valeth said. And for a moment, there was something almost like humor in her voice, dry and tired, but real. Why were you traveling through here in the first place? If your own court is trying to remove you, why leave the safety of your own territory at all? I was seeking allies, she said, beyond my empire's borders. My advisors warned me it was reckless, that I should send envoys instead of traveling myself, but I believed the weight of my presence would matter more, that other powers would take seriously what a queen offered in person, rather than what a messenger merely reported. Allies against the faction trying to remove you? Allies against a much larger threat, Valeth said, and the weight in her voice deepened further, one that endangers not only my empire, but every civilization within reach of it, including, eventually, your own, whether your people realize it or not. Ethan sat back, processing everything she had told him, a queen fleeing an internal power struggle, seeking allies against some unnamed threat, crash landing by chance, or perhaps by sabotage, onto a planet whose people had no idea alien civilizations even existed nearby. It was almost too much to hold in his mind at once, and yet sitting across from her in the dim bunker light, none of it felt impossible. It simply felt like the next piece of a truth that had begun the moment he chose to run toward the crash, instead of away from it. What threat? He asked. Valeth hesitated, glancing toward the door, as though checking they were truly alone, before continuing. There are older powers in this galaxy than my people, Ethan. Powers that have slept for a very long time, and are beginning, in certain sectors, to stir again. My scholars have tracked signs of it for years. Vanished outposts, silent systems, entire fleets that simply stop responding and are never heard from again. My faction at court refuses to believe the warnings, choosing instead to focus their energy on consolidating power at home rather than preparing for what is coming. And you believe them? The warnings? I have seen the evidence myself, she said. I would not have risked this journey otherwise. Ethan absorbed this in silence for a long moment, the enormity of it settling slowly over him. He had spent his entire career defending a single, small outpost on the edge of contested territory, worrying about supply lines and patrol schedules, and the small, grinding concerns of a soldier's daily life. Now he was sitting across from an alien queen who spoke of sleeping powers and vanishing fleets as though describing weather patterns, casual and grave all at once. You think humanity could help against something like that? I do not yet know what your people are capable of, Valeth admitted. But every civilization matters when the threat is large enough. And there is something else, Ethan. Something I did not expect to find on this world. What's that? You, she said simply. A soldier who found an enemy in the wreckage of a crashed ship and chose compassion over duty, protection over procedure. That is rarer than you might think, among any species I have encountered. Ethan felt heat rise in his face at the directness of her words, unsure how to respond to being looked at so plainly, so honestly. Before he could find an answer, a sound outside the bunker made them both go still. Footsteps, careful and deliberate, moving through the underbrush toward the door. He rose instantly, motioning for Valeth to stay low and quiet, his hand moving to the rifle propped against the wall. The footsteps stopped just outside, and a familiar voice called out, low and tense. Cole, I know you're in there. Ethan's stomach dropped. It was Lucas Bennett, a fellow soldier from the outpost, someone he had trained alongside for years, someone he had trusted with his life more than once in the field. If Lucas had found them, it meant the search had narrowed far closer than Ethan had hoped. He opened the door slowly, positioning his body to block the view into the bunker, and found Lucas standing there alone, his expression tight with a mixture of worry and confusion. You've been gone off the grid for 3 days, Lucas said quietly, glancing past Ethan's shoulder toward the darkened interior. Command thinks you might have been taken by whatever crashed out here. I told them I'd check the old maintenance points before they escalated the search. What is going on, Ethan? Ethan hesitated, every instinct telling him to lie, to send Lucas away with some excuse and buy more time. But looking at his friend's face, the genuine concern behind the confusion, he found he couldn't bring himself to do it. Not entirely. I need you to trust me, Ethan said instead, for about 5 more minutes. Can you do that? Lucas's eyes narrowed, but after a long pause, he nodded slowly. 5 minutes. Ethan stepped aside and let him look into the bunker, where Valeth sat on the cot, calm and composed, despite the tension in the room, her violet eyes meeting Lucas's, with the same careful, measuring look she had once given Ethan. Lucas froze in the doorway, his hand instinctively moving toward his own weapon, before Ethan caught his arm. She's not a threat, Ethan said quickly. She needs help, and if command gets to her first, I don't think she survives long enough to explain why that matters. Lucas looked between them for a long, tense moment, his jaw tight, clearly wrestling with years of training that told him exactly what he was supposed to do in this situation, and something else entirely, some flicker of the same instinct that had driven Ethan to make his own choice 3 nights earlier. You're asking me to become a traitor right alongside you, Lucas said finally, his voice low. I'm asking you to give her 5 minutes to explain herself, Ethan said. That's all. After that, if you still think command needs to know, I won't stop you. Valeth spoke then, her voice steady despite the danger of the moment. I understand the risk I represent to you both, but what I have come to say may matter more than either of our lives. I would ask only for the chance to be heard, before judgment is made. Lucas stared at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes, and slowly, reluctantly, he stepped fully into the bunker and let the door swing shut behind him. 5 minutes, he said again, quieter this time. Start talking. Outside, the forest remained still, the search parties moving through distant sectors, unaware that the very thing they sought was sitting quietly in an old forgotten bunker, about to change the course of 2 soldiers' lives, and eventually, the fate of an entire world that had no idea how close it stood to the edge of something far larger than itself. The bunker door burst open before Valeth could finish her first sentence, and 3 armed figures filled the entrance, weapons raised, flashlight beams cutting through the dim interior. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs as he threw himself between the intruders, and Valeth on pure instinct, hands raised, shouting for them to hold their fire. But the shout died in his throat when he saw who stood at the front of the group. Colonel Marcus Doyle, commander of Outpost Varan, lowered his weapon slightly, his sharp eyes taking in the scene with the cold calculation of a man who had spent 30 years reading dangerous situations at a glance. Behind him, 2 junior soldiers kept their rifles trained on Valeth, who had risen slowly from the cot, standing tall despite her injuries, refusing to cower. "Sergeant Cole," Doyle said, his voice dangerously calm. "You want to explain why you've been hiding an unregistered alien life form in an abandoned bunker for 3 days, in direct violation of at least 6 separate protocols? Sir, if you'll just let her speak." "I don't need her to speak," Doyle cut him off. "I need her contained, and I need answers about what that ship was doing in our airspace. Everything else is secondary." Lucas stepped forward carefully, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Colonel, with respect, Cole saved my life more than once out in the field. If he's vouching for her, that should count for something." "It counts for exactly nothing against a security breach of this magnitude," Doyle snapped. "Stand down, Bennett, or you'll be facing charges alongside him." Valeth stepped forward then, ignoring the weapons still trained on her, her voice carrying the same calm authority Ethan had heard when she first told him her title. "Colonel Doyle, I am not your enemy, and I am not a specimen to be contained. I came to this sector seeking allies against a threat that endangers every civilization within its reach, including your own. Sergeant Cole showed me kindness when he had every reason to fear me instead. I would ask that you extend the same courtesy, if only long enough to hear what I have traveled so far to say." Doyle studied her for a long moment, and Ethan could see the calculations running behind the colonel's eyes, weighing risk against opportunity, protocol against the strange, undeniable presence of the woman standing before him. "You speak our language," Doyle said finally. "I learned quickly," Valeth replied. "Necessity is a powerful teacher. And you expect me to believe you're some kind of royalty from a civilization we've never detected, here on some diplomatic mission, when your ship crashed into our territory with no warning and no attempt at contact." "My ship was sabotaged," Valeth said, "by members of my own court who oppose the alliance I hope to build. I did not choose to arrive this way, Colonel. I would have preferred a peaceful approach, proper channels, formal introduction. Circumstances denied me that option." Doyle's radio crackled at his hip, a voice requesting status update, and he held up a hand for silence before responding briefly, ordering the search teams to hold position and await further instructions. When he lowered the radio, his expression had shifted slightly, some of the immediate hostility replaced by something more calculating. "If what you're saying is true," he said slowly, "this goes far above my authority to handle alone." "Then let it go above your authority," Valeth said. "But do so carefully, Colonel. How this moment is handled may determine whether my people, and eventually yours, face what is coming as allies or as strangers, left to fend for themselves separately." Doyle turned to Ethan, his expression hardening again. "You realize what you've done, Cole? You've turned a first contact scenario into an international incident before anyone with the authority to make these decisions even knew it was happening." "I know, sir," Ethan said quietly. "But if I'd reported it the moment I found her, she'd already be dead. Whoever sabotaged her ship would have finished the job the second word got out that she survived the crash and was in our custody, unprotected, before anyone even understood who she was." Doyle's jaw tightened, but he didn't immediately dismiss the point. Ethan pressed on, sensing an opening. "She came here for help, sir. Not to attack us, not to spy on us. She's a queen who lost control of her own court, because she wanted to warn other civilizations about a threat they haven't seen yet. That's not the profile of an invasion. That's someone taking an enormous risk because she believes the alternative is worse." For a long moment, nobody spoke. The 2 junior soldiers kept their weapons raised, but their eyes flicked uncertainly between Doyle and the strange, composed woman, standing calmly in the center of the room, clearly unafraid, despite being outnumbered and outgunned. Finally, Doyle lowered his weapon fully, and after a beat, gestured for the others to do the same. "This gets reported through proper channels immediately," he said. "No more hiding. No more unauthorized decisions, Cole. If General Hale decides she stays in custody while this gets sorted out, that's exactly what happens. Understood? Understood, sir, Ethan said, relief washing through him even as new anxiety took its place. Custody was better than immediate danger, but it was far from safety. Within hours, word had traveled up the chain of command, and by the following morning, a transport had arrived at Outpost Varen, carrying General Owen Hale himself, along with a small team of specialists Ethan didn't recognize, their uniforms marked with insignia, belonging to a division he'd never heard mentioned before, one that apparently existed specifically to handle situations exactly like this one. General Hale was an imposing man, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of steady, watchful presence that made junior soldiers straighten their posture without being told. He listened to Doyle's report without interruption, his expression giving away nothing, and then requested to speak with Valeth directly, in private, with only Ethan present as witness given his role in the initial contact. They met in the outpost's small briefing room, Valeth seated at the head of the table with a composure that seemed entirely unaffected by the armed guards stationed outside the door. Hale sat across from her, studying her carefully before finally speaking. "Your Majesty," he said, and Ethan noted the careful choice of address, a small but deliberate signal of respect. "I've read the preliminary report. I'd like to hear the rest directly from you." Valeth inclined her head slightly. "Thank you for the courtesy of asking, General. Few in your position would have bothered. Few in my position have ever dealt with a genuine alien monarch requesting sanctuary," Hale said dryly. "I'm inclined to at least hear you out, before deciding how the rest of this plays." Over the next hour, Valeth laid out everything she had told Ethan and more, describing her empire's territory, the political structure that had led to the attempt on her life, and the growing evidence of an ancient, dormant power stirring somewhere beyond the borders of known space. Hale listened with careful, measured attention, occasionally asking sharp questions that Valeth answered without hesitation, her account remaining consistent and detailed throughout. "You understand," Hale said finally, "that everything you're describing sounds, from where I'm sitting, exactly like a story someone might construct to gain sympathy and access to a technologically inferior species they intend to exploit." "I understand the suspicion," Valeth said calmly. "I would carry the same doubts in your position, but consider this, General. If my intention were conquest, why would I arrive alone, injured, and without any force capable of threatening you? Why would I speak of alliance, rather than demand submission? Deception rarely requires this much vulnerability." Hale considered this in silence for a long moment, before finally nodding slowly. "I'll grant you that much logic, at least. But logic alone doesn't make policy. This decision doesn't rest with me either. It goes to the Joint Defense Council, and from there, likely to civilian leadership as well. You should prepare yourself for a great deal more scrutiny before anyone commits to anything resembling the alliance you're hoping for." "I expected nothing less," Valeth said. "Time, however, is not a luxury I possess in abundance, General. My own court will not remain paralyzed forever. Whoever moved against me will act again, likely sooner than any of us would prefer, once they learn I survived." "Understood," Hale said, rising from his seat. "In the meantime, you'll remain here under protective custody, not as a prisoner, but as a guest whose safety we intend to guarantee while this gets sorted through proper channels. Sergeant Cole will continue as liaison, given the trust already established between you." Ethan blinked in surprise at being included in the arrangement, but Hale's expression left no room for argument. As the general left the room to begin the long process of contacting his superiors, Ethan found himself alone with Valeth once more, the weight of everything that had just happened settling slowly over both of them. "You did not have to speak on my behalf as strongly as you did," Valeth said quietly, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Especially not to your own commanders." "I meant everything I said," Ethan replied. "Besides, we're past the point where I could pretend I wasn't already involved." A faint smile touched her lips, brief but genuine. "Involved does not begin to describe it, Ethan. You have placed yourself directly at the center of something that will likely reshape both our civilizations, whether either of us intended that outcome or not." Over the following days, life at Outpost Varen transformed in ways Ethan could never have anticipated. Additional specialists arrived, scientists and diplomats and military strategists, all cycling through briefings with Valeth, cataloging every detail of her technology, her language, her account of the ancient threat she had come to warn them about. Ethan remained close throughout, his role as liaison giving him access to conversations far above his usual clearance level, watching as the enormity of what had begun in a wrecked ship and a forgotten bunker slowly rippled outward into something the entire world would soon have to reckon with. Then, on the 5th day since Hale's arrival, everything changed again. A new transmission arrived at the outpost, intercepted from deep space by the specialist's equipment, its origin point tracked to a location within Valeth's own empire. The message was brief, encoded in the same symbols Ethan had seen scrolling across the translation device during those first uncertain days in the bunker, and when it was finally decoded and shown to Valeth, her expression changed in a way Ethan had not seen before. Fear and fierce determination mixing together as she read the words. "They know I survived," she said quietly, setting the translated message down on the briefing table, with hands that trembled slightly, despite her efforts at composure. "And they are coming." "Who's coming?" Ethan asked, though some part of him already dreaded the answer. "A retrieval fleet," Valeth said, "sent under the authority of the faction that arranged my ship's sabotage. Officially, they will claim to be rescuing their lost queen. In truth, they intend to ensure I never return to my throne alive to challenge them again." The room fell silent as the weight of her words settled over everyone present. Outside the briefing room windows, the sky remained calm and blue, utterly ordinary, giving no hint of the storm that was now, undeniably, heading directly toward them. "How long do we have?" Hale asked, his voice tight with the sudden shift from diplomatic negotiation to something far more urgent. Valeth studied the message again, calculating silently before answering. 3 days, perhaps less, if their engines have been upgraded since I last had access to fleet specifications. 3 days to prepare an entire planet that didn't know intelligent alien life existed until a week ago, Hale muttered, already turning toward the door to begin issuing orders. This just became considerably more complicated. Ethan looked at Valeth, who met his gaze steadily, despite the fear he could still see flickering beneath her composed exterior, and understood, with sudden clarity, that whatever came next would test everything they had built in these short, strange days since the crash. The choice he had made in the burning wreckage of her ship had set something in motion that could no longer be stopped or contained, only faced head-on. Together, whatever the cost turned out to be. "We'll figure this out," he said quietly, though he had no idea yet how true that promise would prove to be. Valeth held his gaze for a long moment before nodding slowly, some of the fear in her expression steadying into resolve. "Then let us begin, Ethan. There is no time left to waste." The alarm klaxons at Outpost Varen screamed to life at dawn on the 3rd day, jolting Ethan from a shallow, restless sleep. He was on his feet, and reaching for his gear, before he was even fully awake, years of training carrying him through the motions while his mind raced to catch up with what the sound meant. The fleet had arrived early. He found Valeth already standing at the observation deck when he reached the command center, her eyes fixed on the sky through the reinforced glass, her expression carved from something between fear and cold determination. Beyond the outpost's perimeter, faint streaks of light were beginning to appear in the upper atmosphere, growing brighter and more numerous with each passing second. "They came faster than expected," she said without turning. 2 days, not 3. "They must have anticipated I would warn you, and pushed their engines beyond safe limits to close the gap." "How many ships?" General Hale asked, striding into the room with a tablet already displaying sensor readings that meant little to Ethan, but clearly meant a great deal to the specialists gathered around him. 12, according to the message intercept, Valeth said. "Enough to overwhelm any resistance your world could currently offer, though I doubt that is their true intention. They will not wish to reveal their full strength, or provoke a wider conflict with a species they know nothing about. Their goal is precision, not conquest. They come for me alone." "That's supposed to be reassuring?" Lucas asked from where he stood near the door, arms crossed, tension radiating from every line of his posture. "It should tell you that careful negotiation, backed by a credible show of resolve, may end this without wider bloodshed," Valeth replied. "But only if we present a unified front, and only if I am willing to face them directly, rather than hiding behind your defenses." "Absolutely not." Ethan said immediately, the words out before he could stop them. You walk out there alone, and you're giving them exactly what they came for. I do not intend to walk out alone, Valeth said, finally turning to face him, something steady and resolute in her violet eyes. But I do intend to face them, Ethan. Hiding forever was never a viable strategy. Sooner or later, this confrontation was always going to happen. Better it happens now, on ground where allies stand beside me, than later, when I am isolated and without support. Hale studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly, some silent calculation resolving itself behind his steady gaze. If we're doing this, we do it smart. Full defensive posture, but no first strike. We let them see we're prepared, not aggressive. If your people wanted a straightforward fight, Your Majesty, I suspect they would have simply obliterated this outpost from orbit, rather than announcing themselves this openly. Agreed, Valeth said. They will want to negotiate first, if only to determine whether I have already secured meaningful alliance with your people. That is where our advantage lies. Over the next tense hour, the outpost transformed into a fortress, every available soldier taking position, every defensive system brought online, despite everyone's awareness that human technology stood little chance against whatever the Skarnari fleet carried. Ethan stayed close to Valeth throughout, watching her prepare with a kind of focused calm that both impressed and worried him, knowing how much rested on the next few hours. The ships descended just after midday, 12 sleek vessels arranging themselves in careful formation above the outpost, their hulls marked with sigils Ethan didn't recognize but that made Valeth's expression tighten the moment she saw them. Lord Kaidos, she murmured. I should have guessed he would lead this himself rather than delegate it to lesser commanders. Someone you know? Ethan asked. The architect of the sabotage that brought down my ship, Valeth said grimly. A powerful noble who has long believed my reforms weaken our empire rather than strengthen it. He will not be easily reasoned with, but he is not without honor, in his own twisted understanding of the word. If we handle this correctly, there may yet be a path through this that does not end in open conflict. A single shuttle detached from the lead vessel and descended toward the outpost's landing zone, and Ethan felt his pulse quicken as he took his place beside Valeth and Hale, forming a small delegation to meet whatever emerged from the craft when it finally touched down. The shuttle's ramp lowered with a hiss of released pressure, and a tall, imposing figure stepped out, flanked by 4 armed guards. Lord Kaidos was unlike Valeth in almost every visible way, his features harsher, his silver-toned skin marked with deep scarring across one side of his face, his eyes a cold, pale color that swept across the assembled humans with open contempt before settling on Valeth herself. Your Majesty, he said, his tone dripping with false courtesy, the translation device on Ethan's belt rendering his words in flat, careful English. How remarkable to find you alive, and in such curious company. Lord Kaidos, Valeth replied, her voice steady and cold. I confess I expected your arrival sooner, given how eagerly you arranged my departure from the throne. A ripple of tension passed through the guards flanking him, but Kaidos's expression remained composed, almost amused. An unfortunate accident, nothing more. I am relieved beyond words to find you survived it, and eager to escort you safely home, where the court awaits your return with great concern. Concern, Valeth repeated flatly. Is that what we call it now? Come now, Your Majesty. Let us not air old grievances before an audience unfamiliar with our customs, Kaidos said, his cold eyes flicking briefly toward Ethan and Hale, before returning to Valeth. Your throne needs you. Your people need stability, not further disruption caused by prolonged absence, or by whatever arrangements you may have made with this primitive species. Ethan felt his jaw tighten at the casual insult, but Hale's steady hand on his shoulder kept him from responding, a silent reminder that this moment required patience, not provocation. These people, Valeth said, her voice sharpening, showed me more honor and compassion in a matter of days than my own court has managed in years, Lord Kaidos. I would think carefully before dismissing them so easily. They may yet prove more valuable as allies than you currently understand. Kaidos's composed mask slipped slightly, irritation flickering across his scarred features. Allies. You would offer alliance to a species that has not yet mastered basic interstellar travel, while your own empire fractures behind you? This is precisely the recklessness the court fears, Your Majesty. It is precisely why intervention became necessary. Intervention, Valeth said coldly. Is that what we call attempted assassination now? The words landed like a blow, and for a moment, the tension in the clearing grew thick enough that Ethan found himself instinctively reaching for the weapon at his side, though he knew full well it would mean little against whatever weapons Kydus's guards carried. Careful accusations, Your Majesty, Kydus said quietly, his voice losing its earlier false warmth entirely. Accusations without proof serve no one, least of all a queen already viewed by many as unstable and impulsive. I have the wreckage of my own ship as proof, Lord Kydus, along with the sabotage patterns your engineers were foolish enough to leave behind, Valeth replied. Proof that will be examined thoroughly the moment I return to court, alongside witnesses to your fleet's unusually rapid arrival here, faster than any standard retrieval mission should have allowed. For the first time, something like uncertainty flickered across Kydus's expression, quickly hidden but not quickly enough. Ethan watched the exchange with growing understanding of the deeper game being played here, a contest of words and implications as dangerous, in its own way, as any battlefield. Whatever you believe you can prove, Kydus said finally, his tone hardening. You will return with me now, Your Majesty. The court demands it, and I do not believe your hosts are prepared to risk open conflict with an empire far beyond their current understanding, over a single individual, however important her title. It was Hale who spoke then, stepping forward with the calm authority of a man who had spent decades navigating impossible situations. Actually, Lord Kydus, that's precisely what we're prepared to do. Queen Valeth has requested asylum, and this outpost, along with the full authority of Earth's Defense Council, has granted it. She leaves only if she chooses to leave, not because you've demanded it. Kydus's cold eyes turned fully on Hale, sizing him up with obvious disdain. You would risk your entire species for the sake of one queen you have known for a matter of days? That is either extraordinary loyalty or extraordinary foolishness, General. Maybe it's both, Hale said evenly, but it's the answer you're getting. The standoff stretched on, tense and fragile, until Valeth finally stepped forward, drawing every eye back to her. Lord Kydus, I will offer you a choice. Rather than force this into the conflict you clearly hope to provoke, return to the court and inform them that I intend to come home, but on my own terms, and with the evidence of your betrayal fully prepared for judgment. Attempt to force this confrontation further, here, today, and you risk not only war with a species whose full capabilities remain unknown to you, but also revealing to the entire court exactly how far you were willing to go to silence me. I do not believe even your allies would forgive that risk, should it become public before you are ready to reveal it on your own terms. Kydus studied her for a long, silent moment, calculation clearly running behind his cold eyes, weighing the risk of forcing the issue here against the far greater risk of losing control over how the story of this confrontation would eventually be told back home. This is not finished, Your Majesty, he said finally, his voice tight with barely restrained fury. You may delay the reckoning, but you cannot avoid it forever. I have no intention of avoiding it, Lord Kydus, Valeth replied. Only of facing it on ground of my own choosing, rather than yours. Without another word, Kydus turned and strode back toward his shuttle, his guards falling into formation behind him, and within minutes, the vessel lifted off, rejoining the fleet still hovering above the outpost. Ethan watched, breath held, as the 12 ships slowly began to withdraw, their formation breaking apart as they retreated back toward the upper atmosphere, and, eventually, out of sensor range entirely. The silence that followed felt almost unreal after the tension of the confrontation, and Ethan finally allowed himself to exhale fully, his hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline of the standoff. That's not the end of it, is it? He said quietly, watching Valeth's expression, still tight with wariness despite the fleet's retreat. No, she said. It is only a pause. Kydus will return to court and begin building his case, spreading doubt about my judgment, my fitness to rule, my alliance with a species he will characterize as weak and unworthy of serious consideration. I must return soon, Ethan, and face him directly, or I risk losing my throne entirely, along with any hope of convincing my people to prepare for the threat that matters far more than any of this internal conflict. Hale stepped closer, his expression thoughtful. If you're going back to face this, Your Majesty, I don't think you should go alone, not after everything that's happened here. Valeth turned to him, surprise flickering across her features. You would send your people into the heart of an empire they know almost nothing about, General. That is no small request. It's not a request, Hale said. It's an offer. If what you've told us about the threat gathering out there is even half true, we need to know your people as allies, not as strangers we only met once during a crisis. Sending a small delegation back with you accomplishes both goals. Proves our commitment, and gives us eyes on a civilization we'll need to understand far better if we're going to survive what's coming. Valeth looked between Hale and Ethan, something complicated moving behind her violet eyes, gratitude and worry tangled together. The danger would be real, she said quietly. Kaidos and his allies would not welcome human presence at court, and may see it as further provocation rather than diplomacy. We didn't come this far by avoiding danger, Ethan said, surprising himself with the certainty in his own voice. I'm not letting you walk back into that alone, Valeth. Not after everything. She held his gaze for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them, before finally nodding slowly, resolve settling firmly over her features once more. Then let us prepare properly this time, with allies at my side, rather than only the wreckage of misfortune behind me. If we are to face my court together, we do so as equals, standing on ground we have chosen ourselves. Above them, the sky had cleared entirely, the last traces of the retreating fleet long since vanished, but Ethan understood, with quiet certainty, that the true confrontation was still ahead of them, waiting somewhere among the stars, in a court that had already tried once to end Valeth's reign, and would not hesitate to try again. The Skarnari homeworld took Ethan's breath away the moment their shuttle broke through the upper clouds. Twin moons hung pale against a lavender sky, and below them stretched a capital city unlike anything he had ever imagined. Towers of pale silver stone rising in graceful spirals, and connected by bridges of light that seemed to hum with quiet energy. He had spent his whole life defending a small outpost on the edge of a single world, and now he was descending toward the heart of an empire that spanned more star systems than he could easily count. Beside him, Grace Whitfield, the young diplomat Hale had selected to accompany the delegation, gripped the edge of her seat, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and nerves. Lucas sat across from them, quieter than usual, his jaw set with the same tension Ethan felt settling into his own chest, as the shuttle began its final descent toward the royal palace. Valeth stood at the front of the cabin, no longer dressed in the torn, muddy clothing from the crash, but in formal robes of deep blue and silver that had been prepared for her aboard the retrieval vessel that carried them here. She looked every inch the queen now, composed and regal, though Ethan could see the tension in the set of her shoulders, the careful way she was steadying her breathing as the palace came into view. Whatever happens in there, she said quietly, not turning around, I need you to trust that I know these people, their customs, their weaknesses. Do not act without my signal, no matter what provocation Kaidos offers. Understood, Hale said from where he stood near the shuttle's exit ramp, his expression carefully neutral despite the enormity of what they were walking into. We're here to support you, Your Majesty, not to start a war on your behalf. The shuttle touched down in a grand courtyard already filled with rows of Skarnari nobles and guards, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility as the ramp lowered and the small human delegation stepped out into the alien sunlight. Whispers rippled through the assembled crowd, and Ethan felt every eye in the courtyard settle on them with an intensity that made his skin prickle. Valeth walked at the front, her posture flawless, and the crowd parted before her with a mixture of reluctant respect and barely hidden suspicion. At the far end of the courtyard, atop a wide set of stone steps, stood a figure Ethan recognized immediately from the confrontation at Outpost Varen. Lord Kaidos stood waiting, flanked by a dozen armed guards and several other nobles whose expressions matched his own cold satisfaction. Your Majesty, Kaidos said, his voice carrying easily across the courtyard, amplified by some unseen device. How gracious of you to finally honor us with your return, and how curious that you would choose to bring such unusual company for the occasion. I bring allies, Lord Kaidos, Valith replied, her voice equally clear and steady. Something this court has apparently forgotten the value of, given recent events. A murmur ran through the crowd at the pointed remark, and Kaidos's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, before smoothing back into practiced composure. Recent events that remain, as I understand it, still entirely unproven, Your Majesty. Accusations are easily made. Evidence is another matter entirely. Then let us proceed to evidence without further delay, Valith said. I trust the full court has been assembled, as I requested. Kaidos gestured toward the towering doors behind him, and with a final, calculating look at the human delegation, turned and led the way inside. The throne room beyond was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow high overhead, lined with rows of nobles seated in tiered galleries that curved around a central dais. Ethan had never felt so exposed in his life, walking beside Valith through the center of that enormous chamber, while hundreds of alien eyes tracked their every step. The proceedings that followed stretched on for hours, a formal and exhausting exchange of accusation and counter-accusation, evidence presented and disputed, witnesses called forward to testify about the sabotage of Valith's ship, the unusually rapid deployment of Kaidos's retrieval fleet, and the broader political tensions that had led to this moment. Ethan understood perhaps a third of what was said, the translation device struggling to keep pace with the rapid, formal language of the court, but he understood enough to feel the tide of the room shifting gradually, testimony by testimony, toward Valith's favor. Then, just as it seemed the proceedings might finally conclude with judgment falling against Kaidos, a commotion erupted near the chamber's grand entrance. Guards shouted, weapons were drawn, and a runner burst through the doors, breathless and pale, delivering a message that visibly shook even the most composed nobles in the gallery. Valith's expression shifted the moment she heard the words, fear and urgency replacing her earlier composure entirely. She turned to the assembled court, her voice cutting through the rising panic with practiced authority. Silence, she commanded, and remarkably, the chamber obeyed. What is the nature of this report? The runner, still catching his breath, delivered his message in halting, frightened tones, and as the translation device rendered the words into English, Ethan felt his own blood run cold. An outpost fleet along the Empire's outer border has gone silent, Valith said, translating for the human delegation, as much as processing the news herself. 7 vessels, no distress signal, no wreckage detected, simply gone, as though they never existed at all. The pattern matches exactly what my scholars warned of, the same signature I traveled here to bring warning of in the first place. The chamber erupted into chaos, nobles rising from their seats, voices raised in fear and disbelief, and even Kaidos's confident composure finally cracked, his cold eyes widening slightly at the news. Valith raised her hands, calling for order once more, and slowly, reluctantly, the room settled back into tense silence. This is the threat I came to warn you of, she said, her voice carrying across the stunned chamber. Not a rumor, not exaggeration born of political ambition, as certain members of this court have long insisted. It is real, and it has now reached the very edge of our own territory. We no longer have the luxury of internal conflict, while pretending this danger does not exist. Kaidos stepped forward, his expression torn between fear and the desperate need to maintain his position. Even if this report proves accurate, Your Majesty, that does not excuse your reckless alliance with an unproven species, nor does it erase the questions surrounding your judgment that led us to this point. Enough, Kaidos, a new voice interrupted, and Ethan turned to see an elderly noblewoman rising from the gallery, her expression grave and resolute. The Queen's warnings have proven true before our eyes. Whatever grievances you hold against her governance, they matter little now against a threat capable of erasing an entire fleet without trace. I move that the court formally recognize Queen Valith's authority, and further, that we seriously consider the alliance she has proposed with the species known as humanity, given the urgent need for every possible resource against what is coming. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gallery, spreading faster than Kaidos could counter, and Ethan watched as the political tide he had felt shifting throughout the day finally crested fully in Valith's favor. Kaidos, recognizing the shift, seemed to visibly deflate, his earlier confidence crumbling into something far more careful and calculating. I withdraw my objections, he said finally, his voice tight with barely concealed frustration. For now. Let the court's judgment stand. Valeth turned to face the full gallery, her expression steady despite the enormity of the moment, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a weight and clarity that silenced the last murmurs in the chamber entirely. Then let this court hear my formal decree, she said. Effective immediately, the Skarnari Empire recognizes humanity as a sovereign and valued ally, extending full diplomatic status and mutual defense obligations between our civilizations. This is not a gesture of charity, nor a reckless indulgence, as some among you have claimed. It is a necessary and overdue acknowledgement that in the face of what threatens us all, no civilization, however powerful, can afford to stand alone. The words landed like a thunderclap across the chamber, and Ethan felt the full weight of them settle over him, understanding in that moment that everything that had begun with a burning ship falling from the sky over a quiet forest had led, step by inevitable step, to this exact moment, a moment that would ripple outward across known space and reshape the fate of two entire civilizations. Hale stepped forward beside him, his expression solemn but resolute, and formally accepted the terms of the alliance on behalf of Earth's Defense Council, his voice steady despite the historic weight of the moment. Grace Whitfield, tears of astonishment barely held back, began recording every detail for the reports that would soon reach every government on Earth, reports that would change humanity's understanding of its place in the universe forever. In the days that followed, the alliance rippled outward exactly as Valeth had predicted. News reached rival powers across the galaxy, some reacting with cautious respect, others with open hostility toward what they viewed as a dangerous and unprecedented elevation of an unproven species onto the galactic stage. Old Skarnari enemies, sensing opportunity in the perceived instability of a newly formed alliance, began testing the borders of Valeth's territory, probing for weakness in ways that made clear the coming months would demand far more than diplomatic ceremony. Ethan remained at the palace as official human liaison, working closely alongside Valeth as she navigated the delicate process of consolidating her authority, while simultaneously preparing her empire, and now her new ally, for whatever threat was gathering beyond the border. The 7 vanished vessels remained a haunting mystery, no wreckage ever recovered, no survivors ever found, only silence where an entire fleet had once patrolled. 3 weeks into the new alliance, that silence finally broke. A distress signal reached the palace in the deep hours of the night, fragmented and desperate, originating from a border colony that had, until that moment, reported nothing unusual. Ethan was pulled from sleep by the same urgent alarms that had once woken him at Outpost Varen, and found Valeth already in the command chamber, her expression grim as she studied the incoming reports alongside her military advisors. "They are here," she said quietly as Ethan entered, not needing to specify who she meant. Not a rumor, not a vanished fleet leaving only silence behind. An actual engagement, reported directly by colonists still transmitting even now. "What do we know?" Ethan asked, moving to stand beside her as reports continued scrolling across the display. "Little," she admitted. "Only that something has begun assaulting the colony's defenses, something our sensors struggle to properly identify, as though it exists partially outside the normal parameters our instruments are built to measure. This is what my scholars warned of. This is why I risked everything to seek allies before it was too late." Hale arrived moments later, already dressed and alert despite the hour, and quickly absorbed the unfolding situation. "What's the play here, Your Majesty? Do we have assets close enough to respond?" "A response fleet is already being mobilized," Valeth said, "but I fear conventional force alone may prove insufficient against whatever this truly is. We need more time to understand what we are facing before committing our full strength blindly into a confrontation we do not yet comprehend." Ethan looked at the scrolling reports, the fragmented, desperate transmissions from colonists fighting for their lives against an enemy nobody could properly define, and felt the same instinct that had once driven him to run toward a burning wreckage instead of away from it rise up within him once more. "Then let us go there," he said. "Not just the fleet. You, me, a proper team, gathering direct intelligence rather than relying on second-hand reports filtered through panic and confusion." Valeth turned to him, surprise flickering briefly across her features, before settling into something like grim resolve. You would return to danger so soon after everything that has already been risked, Ethan. I didn't come this far to sit safely in a palace while the thing you tried to warn everyone about finally arrives, he said. Besides, you said it yourself. This alliance only means something if we face what's coming together, not from opposite sides of a very large gap. Whale considered the request for a long moment before nodding slowly. I'll authorize a joint reconnaissance team. Human and Skarnari personnel, working together, gathering real intelligence before the main fleet commits to a confrontation we don't yet understand. It's a calculated risk, but honestly, it might be exactly the kind of demonstration this fragile alliance needs right now. Proof that we're capable of standing together under real pressure, not just in ceremonial declarations. Within hours, a joint vessel was prepared, crewed by a careful mix of Skarnari soldiers and the small human delegation, Ethan and Lucas among them, alongside Valith herself, who insisted on joining, despite the strenuous objections of her advisors. A queen who hides from every danger earns no true loyalty, she told them firmly, ending the debate before it could properly begin. I have asked others to risk everything for this alliance. I will not now ask them to face what is coming, while I remain safely behind. The journey to the border colony took the better part of a day, tension building steadily among the crew, as reports from the ground grew increasingly fragmented and desperate before finally, abruptly, falling entirely silent. When their vessel finally dropped out of transit space above the colony, the sight that greeted them stole the breath from everyone aboard. The colony below bore strange, swirling scars across its surface, patterns that seemed to shift and writhe even from orbit, defying easy explanation. Structures stood intact in some areas, entirely vanished in others, as though something had selectively erased portions of the landscape while leaving the rest untouched. No wreckage, no bodies, only that strange, unsettling emptiness where life had clearly existed only hours before. Scans are inconclusive, the ship's Skarnari technical officer reported, tension evident in every word, despite the language barrier Ethan could sense even without full translation. Whatever caused this does not register clearly against any known energy signature in our databases. Valith stood at the observation window, studying the scarred landscape below with an expression that mixed horror and grim vindication in equal measure. This is precisely what my scholars feared, she said quietly. Not conquest in any form we understand. Erasure. Something that does not seek to rule what it touches, only to remove it entirely. Ethan felt a chill settle over him as he studied the swirling patterns below, understanding with sudden clarity the true scale of what they had all committed themselves to facing. This was not a rival empire seeking territory or resources. This was something else entirely, something ancient and patient that had finally begun to stir, exactly as Valith's warnings had predicted from the very first night in that quiet forest bunker. We need more information before the main fleet arrives, Hale said, his voice steady despite the tension gripping the entire bridge. A ground team, careful and quick, gathering direct data before we commit to any larger response. Valith turned from the window, her earlier fear settling into the same resolute determination Ethan had first glimpsed in the wreckage of her ship, so many days and so many impossible events ago. Then let us go together, she said, meeting Ethan's eyes directly. As we always seem to, it appears, when the stakes grow highest. Ethan managed a faint, determined smile, despite the danger awaiting them below. Wouldn't have it any other way. Together, they prepared to descend into the scarred, silent colony, a human soldier and an alien queen, standing side by side against a threat neither of their civilizations fully understood, bound together by a choice made in a burning wreckage that had, against every reasonable expectation, grown into an alliance capable of reshaping the fate of the entire galaxy. Whatever waited below, whatever answers or dangers the silent colony still held, they would face it exactly as they had faced everything since that first fateful night, not as strangers from different worlds, but as allies who had chosen, again and again, to trust each other, when trust seemed like the most dangerous choice of all. The shuttle doors opened onto the scarred surface, and together, they stepped forward into the unknown, carrying with them the fragile, unprecedented hope that two very different civilizations, bound by courage rather than fear, might yet find a way to face the darkness gathering at the edge of everything they knew, and somehow, together, survive it.